begin, I should again thank Minister Pettigrew, Reverend Sophia, Reverend Anika Whitfield, and Reverend Zachary Crow for preaching over the last several weeks so I could enjoy a sabbatical and you could have a break from me. And I thank them for their work and their service, and I am glad to have them as part of our fellowship. We do not often hear sermons from Jeremiah. I suppose that's because Jeremiah's words are not the everything is beautiful stuff that people want to hear preachers say. And preachers know this. So we are tempted, and we yield to the temptation to avoid Jeremiah and turn to passages that aren't likely to unsettle listeners. After all, if we preach about this kind of stuff enough, folks will say, I don't want to keep hearing about this kind of stuff, and they'll either decide to stop listening or stop coming. And so Jeremiah doesn't get preached about very much. But no matter how people feel about it, Jeremiah's powerful description of God's reaction to the moral and ethical situation in Judah during the 7th century BC speaks to people in every place and time. According to the prophet, it was incredible to God. Catch that. It was incredible to God that people delivered by God from oppression centuries earlier in Egypt would turn away from God. How could people forsake God? Described as the fountain of living water, and manufacture false gods, described as digging out cisterns for themselves, cracked systems, leaking cisterns that can hold no water. How could prophets and rulers and priests and people reject faithfulness to God's love and God's truth and God's justice and God's peace and choose, not be forced, but choose to become a culture defined by greed and fear, injustice, and belief in salvation through violence? The people of Jeremiah's time and place had religion, they had priests, they had prophets. Yet, national pride and national security was their idolatry. They were so proud of their heritage. They were so proud of their ancestral heroes. They were so proud of their national wealth. And because Judah was so proud, Judah was not faithful to God. Because Judah was so proud, Judah was not humble and thankful to God. Jeremiah's painful mission was to speak the truth about God's shame. God's shame. Literally, God is ashamed and disappointed of this proud, ungrateful, unjust, unloving, unhealthy, and unthankful people. You can almost hear God sounding like parents do with their teenagers. After all I did for you, I mean, if you've ever had a teenager in your house, you know what this is coming. After all I've done for you, after all I've given you, after all I've shown you, after all I have helped you do, you turn to this. And in doing so, God starts out by pleading innocent. Speaking for God, the prophet asks, what wrong did your ancestors find in me? Where did I go wrong? What wrong did they find in me that your ancestors went far from me? Catch this now. Went far from me and then went after worthless things and became worthless themselves. You went far from me and went after worthless things and became worthless. We get the image of God and the society in a lawsuit. Think of it as divorce court. God professes to be innocent of wrongdoing. I haven't done you wrong. God professes to have been faithful in the relationship. God declares God's love and God's provision. I have done right by you. I have provided for you. It is as if God, speaking through the prophet, is saying, why have you left me? What did I do wrong? How could you turn from me to this mess? Which raises the question, what does a society look like that fits how Jeremiah described Judah? You understand, our challenge is not just to read these words and think about centuries ago in a far away place, but our challenge is to read these words and to say, what does it look like when a society fits the way Jeremiah described Judah? What does a people look like whose ancestors went after worthless things and became worthless themselves? What does society look like that has changed their glory for something that does not profit? What does it look like when people have forsaken the fountain of living water and have dug out for themselves, gone to work and dug themselves holes and wells that are cracked and can hold no water? It doesn't look comfortable. It's not comforting to realize that people might actually turn away from God while all the time claiming to love God. You check that? It's not comfortable to think that people might actually show up in front of God week in and week out, say that we are a godly nation, a godly society, and claim to be God-fearing people after having and actually have turned away from God at the same time. It's not comfortable. It's not comfortable to realize that people, rulers, and those who guide their thinkings, their priests and their prophets, and those who handle the law, would love money and military power and war making and greed and pride and violence rather than God. It's not comfortable. It is not comfortable to realize that people, their rulers and their priests and preachers and their pundits and their prophets would turn away from God's call to oneness and grace and justice and truth and peace and hope and turn into people who bite at each other, snap at each other, cheat each other, steal from one another, and call that making themselves great again. It is not comfortable to realize that Jeremiah's words spoken for God centuries ago apply to our place, the United States, just as well in our time, the 21st century, as they applied to Judah in Jeremiah's time. It is not comfortable to realize that the words one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all do not describe us. No matter what Fox News pundits and so-called evangelical preachers and Wall Street Journal and Walmart judges and politicians claim, they don't describe us, and we know it. We tell our children to say them, but we tell them to say them so they will make an A on saying the Pledge of Allegiance, but we know we're not. What the words say. It's not comfortable to realize that although the money we spend is inscribed with the words, "In God we trust," the problems of gun violence and lack of access to affordable health care and mass incarceration and global warming and the gaping disparities between the wealthy few and the suffering many and the breakdown of our schools and the lack of our infrastructure, the breakdown of our streets and our roads and our bridges is because our rulers and our priests and our prophets trust greed and pride and fear and guns, not God. None of this is comfortable to realize, nor should it be. Jeremiah's words then and now speak truth about uncomfortable realities that, to put it bluntly, are shameful. It is shameful that we speak of being God-fearing people while refusing to welcome and care for immigrants and other people seeking asylum. It's shameful to say we got a Statue of Liberty that says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, teeming to be give me." It's shameful to say we got that statue standing there in the harbor and then have the nation put money away from disaster relief at the beginning of hurricane season so we can send soldiers down to keep poor, tired, huddled masses from coming into the country. It's shameful. It's shameful that a handful of people hold most of the world's wealth and control most of the world's resources, while the vast majority of people are struggling to survive. They're struggling to have enough to eat. They're struggling to have clean water. They're struggling to have decent health care. They're struggling to have housing. And we have people who have more house than they can live in 5 lifetimes. It's shameful that so-called evangelical preachers and churches have convinced people to believe so much in the idea of personal salvation that the God of universal love and hospitality and justice and peace has been tossed aside like a no longer useful toy or tool in favor of a manufactured God called the National Rifle Association. So much so that people now fear being shot to death in their homes, shot to death in their cars, shot to death when they go to school, shot to death when they go to church, shot to death when they shop if they don't shop, shot if they stay home, shot. And we got preachers inviting folks to bring their guns to church so they can be blessed. It's shameful that public schools are being dismantled by rulers with the help of religious people who favor resegregation and privatization in the name of family values, rather than desegregated educational equity and excellence for children from every background and every neighborhood and every ancestry. It's shameful that the world's richest nation is running away from funding their schools for their own children. Resegregated charter schools and white flight Christian academies are the crack cisterns and false gods of our time. The NRA and Make America Great Again propaganda are and taking money away from disaster relief to spend it on sending troops to the border so you can keep immigrant people and asylum seekers out of the country, are the cracked systems and false god of our time. Gentrification schemes where we tear down neighborhoods where people have lived for generations so we can put up new stuff and sell it at higher prices so the people who've lived there for generations can't afford to live there. Are the cracked gods, cracked systems, and false gods of our time. These are the indications of our idolatry. They show how our rulers and our priests and our prophets and our people in our country have embraced the false god of capitalist materialism, fear of others, violence, and greed. They expose something else, a word we don't use very much: apostasy, A-P-O-S-T-A-S-Y, that religious word that means a turning away from God. And our duty, like that of Jeremiah, is to name the shameful situation of our time and place. Like Jeremiah, we have been called to the uncomfortable duty of confronting the rulers and the priests and prophets of our time and the people of our time and place about the twin evils of idolatry and apostasy. I repeat, we are called to an uncomfortable duty. Uncomfortable duty. Somebody say uncomfortable. But this is what it means to follow Jesus. Didn't you hear Jesus talk about taking up a cross? Hello? Taking up a cross is not a comfortable thing. I'm not talking about the jewelry we wear around our neck. Okay? I'm not talking about the jewelry we wear around our neck. I'm not talking about the cross pin we use as ornaments. When Jesus said taking up the cross, Jesus was talking about taking up the uncomfortable duty of speaking truth to power and living in the truth of God's justice and God's love. This is what it means to be salt of the earth. This is what it means to be light of the world. At the same time, we need to remember that following and taking the cross with Jesus involves more than naming and shaming idolatry and apostasy. Part of the problem with our religion is we major in naming and shaming. Oh, but we name and shame the wrong stuff. We name and shame who's going with who. Hello? Oh, yeah. We name and shame how long your dress is, how low your collar is, how tight your clothes are, and whether or not you go to the right looking kind of church. We name and shame that kind of stuff. We don't name and shame the kind of stuff that Jeremiah talked about. The truth about following Jesus is more than naming and shaming idolatry and apostasy. The Spirit of God calls us to be agents of light, not just folks who curse the darkness. It's easy to curse the darkness, but God has called us to do more than just cuss darkness. God has called us to shine the light. Let your light shine. Darkness never does light up anything. I don't care how much you cuss it. It doesn't get light. You can cuss your burned out light all you want to. It won't come back on. You can cuss your burned out light all you want to. It won't glow. You can cuss your burned out light all you want to. It will not get bright. The Spirit of God calls us to do more than just curse the darkness. The Spirit of God calls us to show what it looks like. Let your light so shine. What it looks like to be people of unconditional love and universal hospitality. So what does it look like? It looks like you and me welcoming and protecting and defending our immigrant and asylum-seeking brothers and sisters from raids by customs and border patrol and ICE agents. Yes, it looks like us saying, no, you can't take them. It looks like us acting like Rosa Parks and actually violating the law that says, hey, You got to go to the back of the bus. It looks like us saying, oh, no, I'm not going to the back of the bus, and I'm not going to get up. It looks like us being Muhammad Ali, saying, no, I'm not going to sign up for this unjust war. It looks like Jesus. The Spirit of God calls us to show what it looks like for people to put our faith in God on display by acts of generosity and lives of kindness to all persons. So let's defend public education and insist that public schools must be excellent everywhere for every child. Let's defend public health and insist that every person has the right to universal free health care. The air is free. The water ought to be free. Access to health care ought to be free. Jesus didn't charge anybody a penny for healing. Jesus was showing us what it looks like. Let us defend public safety and insist that every person has the right to be free from abusive and homicidal behavior from law enforcement officers. You shouldn't have to be rich and white to not have to worry about getting shot to death by the cops. Let's demand fair wages for all workers. I don't care whether they're picking up garbage or teaching school or cleaning up commodes in nursing homes. Every child of God deserves fair wages for the work they do. No child of God should have to go on welfare because they don't make enough money because they work. In doing these things, we show what it means, what it looks like to be God's people, not people who've tossed the fountain of living water aside and dug worthless cisterns that can hold no water. No matter how much you like it, the New York Stock Exchange doesn't make the average person rich. It only makes the folks who are rich enough to invest in the stock rich. The Spirit calls you and me not only to do those things, the Spirit not only also strengthens us and equips us to follow Jesus in showing the more excellent way of God's love and truth and justice and hope and peace. God calls us. God calls you and me. God calls the people who say we are called by God's name to act like we haven't put God down. To act like we're still in love with God. To act like God is still our number one. To act like, as Al Green says, I'm still in love with you. God calls us to stand with Jeremiah and Jesus and other prophetic people across time. God calls us to show what it looks like to be in love with God. And it means looking like Rosa Parks sitting down and saying, no, segregation is wrong. I don't care what the law says. It looks like those freedom riders. It looks like the people of the Occupy movement. It looks like those people who are saying, wait a minute, it's wrong to be burning up the Amazon rainforest and then complaining about heavier storms. It's wrong for us to be tossing aside our public schools so a few folks can get some money. And God calls us. The Spirit leads us. The Spirit is waiting on us. And Jesus, God's Son, has shown us how to trust God and glorify God and honor God this way. God has entrusted us with this work, and that work includes the uncomfortable work of naming and shaming, but it also includes the more powerful work of showing what it looks like to be in love with God. So let us glorify God by faithful living in obedience to the God of grace and truth and justice and peace. Let us act like we have pure hearts for God. Let us act like folks who have not put God down, have not tossed God aside, have not chosen, manufactured false gods, and dug cisterns that are cracked. Amen.